My name is Eleanor Vance, and I'm 28 years old. As I drove toward my childhood home, my palms were slick with sweat against the steering wheel. 5 years of absence, and now I was returning with colonel insignia hidden in my bag. My family had always dismissed my military career as nothing more than a temporary detour, a youthful whim. Little did they know that tomorrow at my father's company event, everything would change. I parked in the familiar driveway, took a deep, shaky breath, and stepped out. Before I continue this story, I'd love to know where you're reading from. Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, if you've ever been underestimated by your family, this story will show you exactly how sweet vindication can taste. The moment I walked through the front door of my childhood home, I was struck by how nothing had changed. The same faded family photos lined the hallway, each one a testament to a past I'd both cherished and longed to escape. The same worn furniture occupied the living room, subtly sagging with years of unspoken judgments. And yes, the same heavy air of expectation and subtle disapproval hung in the air. My small-town Montana upbringing was preserved like a time capsule, right down to the outdated curtains my mother Martha had always stubbornly refused to replace. "Eleanor, you made it," my mother called from the kitchen. Her voice carrying that familiar, almost imperceptible undertone of disappointment she reserved exclusively for me, especially when compared to my brother Arthur. She didn't even bother to come greet me, leaving me feeling like an uninvited guest in my own former sanctuary. I set my bag down, its contents a secret burden, and wandered through the house, trailing my fingers along familiar surfaces. My father Richard had worked at Apex Defense Systems for over 30 years, clawing his way from a junior engineer to a senior executive through sheer dedication and relentless networking. Our entire family revolved around his career success, and the long, imposing shadow it cast for my brother to follow. "Your brother will be here soon," my mother informed me as I finally entered the kitchen, the clatter of pots and pans a stark contrast to the silence that had greeted me. "He just got promoted again, senior project manager now." The pride in her voice was unmistakable, a radiant warmth she had never not once used when discussing my career. "That's great," I replied, the words feeling mechanical, practiced from years of similar conversations. "I'll have to congratulate him." My mother continued preparing dinner, her voice a cheerful stream of chatter about Arthur and his wife Sarah, their new house, and all the corporate accomplishments that cemented their status as the golden children of our family. Not once did she ask about my life, my challenges, or my career. It was as if my entire existence outside their approved narrative simply didn't merit discussion. I excused myself the familiar sting of invisibility, a dull ache in my chest, and headed upstairs to my old bedroom. Like everything else, it remained frozen in time. Cheerleading trophies from high school academic awards and college acceptance letters still decorated the walls, and shelves meticulously preserved. My parents had lovingly showcased everything from before I made what they considered my disappointing choice to join the Reserve Officer Training Corps ROTC instead of pursuing a business degree. What they conspicuously did not display were any acknowledgments of my military career, no photos of my commissioning ceremony, no shadow boxes of achieved ranks, no newspaper clippings about deployments or promotions. In their minds, I had wasted my potential the moment I chose service over corporate success. I sat on my childhood bed, running my hand over the familiar quilt, vividly remembering the night I told them about my ROTC scholarship. My father had stared at me with such profound disappointment that I almost changed my mind. "The military is for people without options, Eleanor," he had said, his voice laced with a condescension that cut deeper than anger. "You're smarter than that." Even then, they had been subtly grooming Arthur to follow in my father's footsteps at Apex. My brother had eagerly embraced the plan, thriving on the blatant favoritism, and using every opportunity to remind me how much more successful he would inevitably be. I opened my suitcase and carefully removed the garment bag containing my dress uniform. Tomorrow, Apex Defense Systems would be hosting their annual leadership conference, and my father had casually mentioned that the CEO, Samantha Reed, would be visiting their branch. What my family did not know was that I was now the military liaison for the $0.2 billion defense contract between the Army and Apex, a position I had earned through years of dedicated service and expertise. My finger traced over the silver eagle insignia of my colonel rank, achieved faster than almost anyone in my division's history. At 28, I was one of the youngest colonels in the modern Army, specializing in cybersecurity defense systems, the very technology Apex was contracted to develop. I carefully hung up my uniform in the closet, making sure it was hidden behind some old clothes. For tonight, I would endure one more family dinner of dismissal and condescension. Tomorrow would be different. The doorbell rang, announcing Arthur's arrival. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders like I was heading into battle, and went downstairs to face my family. The dining room felt smaller than I remembered, constricted by the oversized personalities gathered around the table. My brother Arthur had arrived with his wife Sarah, both dressed in expensive business casual attire that screamed corporate success from every stitch. My cousin Brenda had also been invited, which was no surprise. She worked as a finance director at a prestigious bank and was often held up as another shining example of what I should have aspired to be. "Eleanor, you remember Brenda," my mother said, as if we hadn't grown up together, her tone subtly implying that Brenda's achievements were more noteworthy than mine. "She just closed a multi-million-dollar deal for her bank." "Hi, Brenda," I said, giving her a genuine smile. Unlike my immediate family, Brenda had always been kind to me, even if she didn't quite understand my choices. "It's good to see you, Elle," she replied, giving me a quick hug. "Been way too long." The initial conversation remained pleasantly superficial, as we served ourselves from the elaborate dishes my mother had prepared. My father Richard sat at the head of the table, occasionally checking his phone for work emails, despite my mother's disapproving glances. "So, Dad," Arthur began, predictably steering the conversation toward himself, his voice brimming with barely contained excitement. "I wanted to tell you about the new project I'm heading up. Samantha personally selected me to lead the team." My father beamed with unrestrained pride. "That's my boy Samantha Reed doesn't hand out responsibilities lightly. You must have really impressed her." "Well?" Arthur continued, shooting me a smug glance to make sure I was paying attention. "It's the same project you've been working on for years. Samantha says my fresh perspective might help move things along faster." I bit my tongue, a bitter taste rising in my mouth, knowing that the project was actually the Army contract I was now overseeing. If only they knew how much authority I actually had over the success or failure of Arthur's new position. My mother, Martha, immediately jumped in, eager to showcase Arthur's achievement. "Tell them about the staff you're managing now, dear." Arthur puffed up, radiating self-importance. 12 direct reports, including 2 senior engineers who have been with the company for over 20 years. They weren't too happy about reporting to someone younger, but they got over it when they saw my results. "That's wonderful," my mother cooed, then turned to me with a thin, almost pitying smile. "Eleanor, how's your job going? Are you still at the same rank?" The dismissive way she said job rather than career was not lost on me. "Things are going well," I replied simply, not willing to reveal my promotion yet. "Still a captain or whatever?" my father asked vaguely, not even knowing the correct progression of military ranks. "Something like that," I answered, taking a bite of mashed potatoes to avoid elaborating, the bland taste mirroring the conversation. "You know," my mother interjected, determined to highlight what she considered true success. "Brenda just bought a beautiful new condo downtown. 3 bedrooms with a gorgeous view of the mountains." Brenda looked genuinely uncomfortable at being used as a comparison point again. "It's really not that impressive," she said graciously, trying to deflect the attention. "Just good timing in the market." "Still," my mother continued, ignoring Brenda's attempt at modesty, "it's nice to see young people establishing themselves properly, building equity instead of moving around every few years." The dig at my military lifestyle was clear. I had lived in 4 different states and 2 countries in the last 8 years, something my mother considered unsettled and immature. "Speaking of tomorrow," my father said, thankfully changing the subject, "the CEO is coming to review our branch. It's a big deal. Samantha Reed doesn't visit regional offices often." "I have my presentation ready," Arthur boasted, practically preening. "Samantha already emailed me personally to say she's looking forward to my innovation proposal." "Is there anything special planned for the visit?" I asked innocently, feigning a casual interest. My father nodded. "Full staff meeting project reviews and a special announcement about the military contract. Some colonel is supposed to come as the Pentagon liaison, but I doubt they'll send someone that high-ranking. Probably just some major who'll be impressed by our operation." I suppressed a knowing smile. "That sounds interesting." "Not really," Arthur scoffed, dismissive as ever. "Military types never understand the business side of things. They just follow orders and check boxes." "Arthur," Brenda said with a frown, a rare flicker of disapproval crossing her face, "that's not fair." But my brother was on a roll now, fueled by years of unchallenged superiority. "Come on, we all know the truth. The military is a fallback career. People who can't cut it in the real competitive world hide behind ranks and regulations." My mother nodded in agreement, her gaze on me filled with a mixture of sadness and misguided affection. "We always knew you were so bright, Eleanor. That's why it was such a disappointment when you chose that path." "What exactly do you think I do in the Army?" I asked, keeping my voice level, though my jaw felt tight. "Push papers, follow protocols." My father shrugged, a dismissive gesture that spoke volumes. "Important work, sure, but not exactly challenging for someone with your potential." "You'll never be anything there." Arthur laughed, a cruel, cutting sound. 10 years from now, you'll still be taking orders while I'm running my own division." The words stung despite my accomplishments. Years of therapy had helped me recognize that my family's approval shouldn't matter anymore, but old wounds ran deep and their barbs still found their mark. "I think Eleanor made a choice that works for her," Brenda attempted to defend me, her voice gentle. "A waste is what it is," My mother sighed dramatically, her theatrics designed to amplify my supposed failure. All that potential. Remember how all your teachers said you could run a company someday? I pushed food around my plate, the appetite I'd had moments before completely gone, as they continued dissecting my supposed failures and missed opportunities. The conversation eventually moved on to Arthur's upcoming vacation to Hawaii, Sarah's promotion at her law firm, and Brenda's investment portfolio. No one, not a single one of them, asked about my recent deployment or the specialized training I had completed. As dessert was served, my father mentioned again how important tomorrow's meeting was for his career. 28 years I've put into Apex. This contract could be what finally gets me to vice president. I nodded sympathetically, a secret smile playing on my lips, knowing that tomorrow would indeed change everything, though certainly not in the way he expected. Later that night, I retreated to my childhood bedroom, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling into slumber. From down the hall, I could hear my parents still praising Arthur's achievements. "He really is exceptional," my mother was saying, her voice soft with adoration. "Samantha would be foolish not to see his potential for senior leadership." I closed my eyes, fingers tracing the colonel insignia I had slipped from my bag. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. Sleep evaded me as I stared at the glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to my ceiling relics from a childhood when my potential had been measured differently. Back then, before Arthur started working at Apex, before my decision to join ROTC, my parents had seen something in me. But that changed the moment I chose a different path than the one they had painstakingly planned. I remembered sitting at this same dining table during my sophomore year of college, an ROTC brochure clutched in my hand, explaining how the program would pay for my education and provide a career path I found deeply meaningful. "The military?" my father had asked, his face contorting, as if I had suggested becoming a street performer. "That's for people who can't get real jobs, Eleanor." "It is a real job," I had countered, my voice trembling but firm. "And it's what I want." My mother had exchanged worried glances with my father. "But what about law school or business? You always said you wanted to work at Apex someday." No, they had always said that. I had merely nodded along, trying to be the compliant daughter they wanted. When I stood my ground, the subtle undermining began. My achievements in ROTC went unacknowledged. My commissioning as a second lieutenant was attended only by Brenda, who drove 6 hours to be there when my parents suddenly had unavoidable work commitments. My father had Arthur's promotion to junior analyst at Apex framed on his desk, while my military portrait remained tucked away in a drawer. Yet, despite their dismissal, my career flourished. My aptitude for systems analysis and cybersecurity had been recognized early. By 23, I had been promoted to captain and assigned to a specialized unit developing defensive protocols against emerging cyber threats. By 26, I had reached major after leading a task force that identified and neutralized a sophisticated attack on military infrastructure, saving countless classified documents and potentially lives. General Peterson had been my first true mentor, seeing potential in me that my family refused to acknowledge. "Vance," she had said after a particularly grueling training exercise, "you think differently than the others. That's going to take you places." Under her guidance, I learned to trust my instincts and leverage my unique perspective. When a routine security audit revealed patterns others missed, General Peterson encouraged me to pursue it further. The investigation ultimately uncovered a coordinated attempt to breach multiple defense systems. The operation I subsequently led earned me an early promotion to lieutenant colonel and put me on the Pentagon's radar. General Peterson, by then a brigadier general, had personally recommended me for the Apex liaison position. "They're developing next-generation security protocols," she had explained. "We need someone who understands both the technical and strategic implications, someone who can speak the language of both military and corporate worlds." When she pinned the silver eagle of full colonel to my uniform just 3 weeks ago, the ceremony was attended by generals and Pentagon officials, but not my family. I hadn't even told them about the promotion. Years of dismissal had taught me to stop seeking their approval. "Colonel Vance," General Peterson had said afterward, her eyes warm with pride, "I hope you realize what an achievement this is. Youngest colonel in the Cyber Command's history." I did realize it, but tomorrow would be the first time my family would truly understand what I had accomplished. The Apex contract was massive $1.2 billion for developing advanced cybersecurity systems for military applications. As liaison, I had final approval on all major decisions, technical specifications, and budget allocations. In the most literal sense, I would be overseeing my father's and brother's work. The irony was almost too perfect. For years, they had belittled my career choice, and now I held significant influence over the project that could determine their professional futures. I got out of bed and removed my uniform from the garment bag. The midnight blue fabric was immaculate, brass buttons gleaming even in the dim light of my childhood bedroom. I ran my fingers over the rows of ribbons and medals, each representing missions achievements and sacrifices my family knew nothing about. The Silver Eagle insignia caught the light as I turned the uniform jacket in my hands. I remembered my father once saying, "Ranks don't mean anything in the real world, Eleanor. Out here, it's about what you can do, not what title they give you." He would learn tomorrow that in my world, this rank was earned through proving exactly what I could do repeatedly under pressure and against overwhelming odds. I meticulously inspected every detail of my uniform, checking for loose threads or spots that needed attention. The ritual calmed me, the familiar routine, grounding me against the emotional turbulence of being home. By the time dawn broke, I had moved past the hurt of yesterday's dinner. The uniform hung ready. My hair was precisely pinned according to regulation, and my resolve was firm. Today, Colonel Eleanor Vance would report for duty, not the disappointing daughter they thought they knew. I dressed with practiced efficiency, each button and pin placed with precision. The person in the mirror reflected confidence, authority, and purpose. No trace remained of the insecure girl who had once desperately sought her parents' approval. As I pinned the colonel insignia to my collar, I reminded myself that this moment was not about revenge. It was about finally allowing my family to see me as I truly was, for better or worse. If they couldn't accept my success on my terms, that would be their loss, not mine. I checked my watch, a gift from General Peterson. It was time. The company event would begin in an hour, and I needed to arrive early to coordinate with the security team. Downstairs, I heard my parents and Arthur preparing to leave separately. They had no idea I would be joining them, much less in what capacity. I waited until I heard their cars pull away before heading downstairs and out to my own vehicle. The drive to Apex Defense Systems took less than 15 minutes. I used the time to center myself, reviewing key points about the contract I would be discussing today. This wasn't just about showing my family who I had become. It was about ensuring a critical national security project received the oversight it required. As I pulled into the reserved parking spot marked Military Liaison, I straightened my uniform one last time. The weight of responsibility settled comfortably on my shoulders, far more natural than the weight of family expectations ever had. It was time to step into the role I had earned regardless of who might be watching. The Apex Defense Systems headquarters loomed before me, a gleaming monument to corporate success and military-industrial partnership. The glass and steel structure housed some of the most advanced technology development in the country, including the cybersecurity systems I was now responsible for overseeing. Security at the entrance was tight as expected for a facility with multiple classified projects. I approached the guard station where two security officers straightened immediately upon noticing my uniform and rank. "Good morning, Colonel," the first guard said, instantly recognizing the Silver Eagle on my shoulder. "May I see your identification, please?" I presented my military ID and project authorization. "Colonel Eleanor Vance, Pentagon, liaison for Project Aegis." The guard's eyes widened slightly as he processed my clearance. "Yes, ma'am. You are expected in the main conference room. Would you like an escort?" "That won't be necessary," I replied. "I know the way." In truth, I had studied the building layout extensively before arriving. As I walked through the security checkpoint, I could feel the atmosphere shift. Military officers of my rank rarely visited regional offices, and certainly not ones as young as me. Employees stopped mid-conversation as I passed, some nodding respectfully, others clearly curious about my presence. The elevator carried me to the executive floor, where the day's meetings would take place. As the doors opened, I came face to face with my brother Arthur, who was reviewing notes on a tablet. His eyes flicked up casually, then widened in shock as he registered both my presence and my uniform. "Eleanor, what are you doing here? And why are you wearing that?" Confusion and the beginning traces of alarm crossed his face as he noticed the colonel insignia. "Good morning, Arthur," I replied professionally, my voice calm, despite the tremor of anticipation in my stomach. "I'm here for the project review." Before he could respond, my father turned the corner, engaged in conversation with two other executives. He stopped mid-sentence when he saw me, his expression shifting from surprise to confusion to concern in rapid succession. "Eleanor, what is going on? Why are you in uniform?" He glanced around nervously, clearly worried about what his colleagues might think. "Dad," I acknowledged with a nod. "I was just about to head into the conference room to prepare. The meeting starts in 20 minutes, correct? Genjini." The executives with my father were staring at my rank insignia with growing recognition. One of them, Brenda Jenkins from Legal, according to her name badge, stepped forward. "Colonel, it's an honor to have you here. We weren't aware you would be attending in person today." My father's face was a mask of utter bewilderment. "Colonel Eleanor, what is this about?" I maintained my professional demeanor, acutely aware of the growing audience in the hallway. "I believe CEO Reed will explain everything during the meeting, if you'll excuse me." As I walked toward the conference room, I could hear the whispered conversations erupting behind me. Years of military training had taught me to maintain composure under pressure, but I couldn't deny the small, deeply satisfying feeling I felt at their shock. The conference room was already being prepared by staff setting up presentation materials and refreshments for the high-level meeting. The young woman arranging water pitchers nearly dropped one when she saw me enter. "Oh, Colonel, we weren't told you would be here in person. Do you need anything special set up?"
"Everything looks fine, thank you," I replied, taking a seat at the position reserved for the military liaison. Over the next 15 minutes, various executives and team leaders filtered into the room. Many introduced themselves to me with a deference that contrasted sharply with how my family had treated me just the previous evening. Several mentioned being surprised to meet me in person, as they had expected a video conference. My father and brother entered the room together, both looking unsettled, their usual swagger noticeably absent. They took seats far from me, occasionally shooting confused, anxious glances in my direction. I focused on reviewing my notes, not giving them the satisfaction of an explanation before the meeting officially began. At precisely 9:00 a.m., the door opened and CEO Samantha Reed entered, flanked by her executive team. Samantha was a formidable presence, known for her direct approach and strategic brilliance. She had led Apex to become one of the top defense contractors in the nation. The room fell silent as she scanned the attendees, her gaze stopping when it reached me. A warm smile of recognition spread across her face as she changed direction, heading straight for my position. "Colonel Vance," she said, warmly extending her hand. "What an unexpected pleasure to have you here in person. I thought we were scheduled for a video conference." I stood and shook her hand firmly. I was in town visiting family and thought this would be a good opportunity to review the project in person. Samantha nodded appreciatively. "Excellent initiative. Your presence will certainly make today's discussions more productive." She turned to address the room, her voice carrying authority and unmistakable respect. "For those who may not be aware, Colonel Vance is our Pentagon liaison for Project Aegis. She will be overseeing the implementation of the new security protocols and has final approval authority for all technical specifications." I could see my father's jaw literally drop from across the room, his face pale with shock. Arthur was staring at me as if seeing a stranger, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and burgeoning horror. "Good morning, Colonel," Samantha continued with another respectful nod in my direction. "I look forward to your insights today." The meeting began with project updates from various team leaders. Each presenter addressed their comments to both Samantha and me, acknowledging my authority over the military aspects of the project. When technical questions arose about integration with existing defense systems, all eyes turned to me for answers. I provided detailed analysis and clear directives, drawing on my years of specialized experience. With each comment I made, I could see my father and brother exchanging incredulous looks, their worldview visibly crumbling. When it came time for Arthur to present his portion, his normally confident voice wavered, a stark contrast to his boastful demeanor last night. "As the team lead for user interface integration, I have developed a streamlined approach to..." He faltered as he caught my eye, his face flushing. "Please continue, Mr. Williams," I encouraged professionally, as if he were any other presenter and not my brother who had laughed at my career choice just 12 hours earlier. Arthur stumbled through his presentation, clearly thrown by my presence and position. When he finished, I asked several pointed technical questions that exposed gaps in his planning, not out of malice, but because the project demanded thorough scrutiny. "These are important considerations that need to be addressed before we can approve this phase," I concluded, my voice firm. "Please submit revised specifications by the end of the week." My father watched this exchange with a stunned expression, witnessing his son being held accountable by his daughter, the daughter he had dismissed for years as wasting her potential. As the meeting progressed, it became increasingly clear to everyone in the room that I possessed an expertise and authority that commanded respect. My family was seeing for the first time what my colleagues and superiors in the military had recognized years ago. By the time Samantha closed the meeting 3 hours later, the power dynamics had been irrevocably altered. "Colonel Vance will remain on site through tomorrow to conduct security assessments," she announced. "I expect everyone to provide her with whatever information and access she requires. This project is critical to national security and to Apex's future." As the room cleared, Samantha approached me again. "Colonel, I must say your reputation is well-deserved. General Peterson speaks highly of you, but seeing you in action today confirms everything I have heard." From the corner of my eye, I could see my father hovering nearby, clearly eager to speak with me, but uncertain how to approach. The moment of revelation had arrived, and there would be no going back. The conference room slowly emptied, leaving only my family and a few senior executives who were engaged in conversation with Samantha Reed. My father hovered awkwardly at the edge of the group, visibly struggling to process what he had just witnessed. Arthur stood beside him, his earlier confidence replaced by confusion and dawning realization. Samantha gestured me over to join her small circle, seemingly unaware of the profound family drama unfolding. "Colonel Vance, let me introduce you properly to our senior team.
Some of them you may already know from project documentation, but it's always better to connect in person. I nodded professionally and joined her. She placed a hand lightly on my shoulder, a gesture of collegial respect that would have been unthinkable between a CEO and a junior team member. Everyone, this is Colonel Eleanor Vance, the Pentagon's primary liaison for Project Aegis. Colonel Vance has been instrumental in developing the security frameworks that will form the backbone of our system. The Senior Vice President of Engineering, a man named Robert Miller, extended his hand. Colonel, your reputation precedes you. Your paper on adaptive countermeasures against quantum computing threats was revolutionary. We have implemented several of your recommendations already.
Thank you, Mr. Miller, I replied, acutely aware of my father and brother watching this exchange with open disbelief. I appreciate the practical application of theoretical work.
Samantha continued the introductions until she reached my father. And of course you must know Richard Vance, our Director of Regional Operations. Richard has been with Apex for nearly 3 decades. An awkward silence fell as everyone registered our shared last name. Samantha looked between us, realization dawning on her face. Vance, are you related?
Before I could answer diplomatically, my father stepped forward. She's my daughter. He said, his voice a complex mixture of confusion and a new emotion I had never heard from him before. Was it respect?
Your daughter? Samantha looked genuinely surprised. Richard, you never mentioned your daughter was Colonel Vance, the Colonel Vance who has been overseeing our biggest military contract. My father struggled to find words. I wasn't aware of Eleanor's current position. Samantha turned to me with a questioning look. I maintained my professional demeanor despite the intensely personal undercurrents. My family and I have not had much opportunity to discuss my career progression, I explained simply. Arthur, unable to contain himself any longer, stepped forward, his voice a disbelieving whisper. You can't be serious. You're the colonel everyone has been talking about. The one with final approval on the entire project. Yes, I confirmed, meeting his gaze directly. I have been overseeing Project Aegis for the past 6 months since my promotion to full colonel. 6 months? My father repeated, his voice hollow, as if the air had been sucked out of the room. You've been a colonel for 6 months and never told us. Samantha looked increasingly uncomfortable as she realized she had stumbled into deep-seated family tension. Well, this is certainly unexpected. Colonel Vance, perhaps you would like to explain your role directly to the team. Since you are here in person, we should take full advantage. I nodded gratefully for the professional redirect. Of course, Project Aegis represents a $1.2 billion investment in next-generation cybersecurity infrastructure. As the military liaison, my role is to ensure that all developments meet Pentagon specifications and security requirements. I moved to the front of the room and activated the presentation screen displaying the project overview. As I spoke, I could see the expressions on the executives' faces shift from curiosity to genuine respect. My detailed knowledge of both the technical aspects and strategic implications demonstrated exactly why I held my position. All major design decisions, budget allocations, and implementation strategies require my approval before proceeding. I continued, the words landing heavily in the room. This includes staffing decisions for key positions. My brother paled at this last point, undoubtedly remembering his boast about leading a new team on the project. Samantha nodded approvingly as I finished my overview. As you can all see, we are fortunate to have Colonel Vance guiding this project. Her expertise is unmatched, and her authority in this matter is absolute. The executives nodded in agreement, several making notes. My father sat rigid in his chair, his expression unreadable, a complex mixture of pride, shock, and perhaps a touch of regret. In fact, Samantha continued, her gaze sweeping across the room. Colonel Vance will be conducting performance evaluations of all team leads over the next 2 days to assess our progress and resource allocation. Arthur's face went from pale to ashen, the color draining completely. Just last night he had laughed about my career amounting to nothing, and now I would be evaluating his performance. As the meeting concluded, Samantha pulled me aside. Colonel, I had no idea Richard was your father. This must be quite a proud moment for your family. I offered a diplomatic smile. It is certainly a significant moment. Well, they should be extremely proud. Your work has been exceptional. I've told Richard many times how fortunate we are to have such a strong military partner on this project. My father overheard this exchange as he approached, his expression now a mixture of confusion and what appeared to be dawning regret. Eleanor, he began, struggling with how to address me in this new context. We need to talk. Of course, I replied professionally. I have a brief meeting with the security team, then I can meet you in your office at 11:00 a.m. He nodded, mutely unaccustomed to taking scheduling directions from me. As the executives filed out, I could hear them murmuring about the unexpected revelation. Did you know Richard's daughter was Colonel Vance? No wonder she rose so quickly with connections like that. Actually, I heard Robert Miller's voice carry clearly across the room. I heard she refused any family connections. Did it all on merit? My father stopped in his tracks. The implication clear, I had achieved my position not because of my family connections, but despite their lack of support. The truth was finally coming to light, and with it the opportunity for long overdue understanding.
At precisely 1100 a.m., I knocked on the door of my father's office. Through the glass partition, I could see not just my father, but my mother and brother as well. Someone must have called my mother to come to the office after the morning's revelations, unable to keep the astonishing news to herself.
"Enter," my father called, his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. I stepped inside, still in full uniform, and closed the door behind me. My mother Martha sat perched on the edge of a chair, her expression fluctuating between confusion and something that looked almost like fear. Arthur stood by the window, arms crossed defensively across his chest, a clear sign of his internal struggle. "Please sit down," my father offered, gesturing to the chair across from his desk.
"Thank you, but I prefer to stand," I replied automatically, adopting the at-ease position, hands clasped behind my back. An uncomfortable, heavy silence filled the room until my father finally spoke, his voice strained.
"Why didn't you tell us all this time? You thought what, Dad?" I asked calmly, my voice steady despite the surge of emotion within me. That I was wasting my potential, that I would never amount to anything in the military, that I was hiding from real competition. I quoted their various dismissals over the years, without raising my voice, letting the words hang in the air between us. "We didn't know," my mother interjected, her voice thin and defensive. "How could we know if you never told us?" "I sent you invitations to every promotion ceremony," I replied, my gaze unwavering. "I called after each new assignment. I emailed articles when my work was declassified enough to be recognized publicly. But a colonel," my father said, still struggling with the concept, as if my rank defied the laws of physics. That is a very high rank." "Yes," I confirmed. "It is. It's equivalent to a corporate vice president, approximately." This comparison landed exactly as I expected, causing both my father and brother to sit up straighter, their eyes wide with a new unwelcome understanding. "And you have authority over our contract?" Arthur asked, his tone accusatory, a hint of betrayal in his voice. "Is that why you came home now to ambush us and embarrass me in front of Samantha?" "I came home because it has been 5 years, and despite everything, you are my family," I replied evenly, my voice devoid of emotion. The timing with the contract review was coincidental, though admittedly convenient. "Convenient?" my father repeated bitterly, his face contorted with anger. "You show up at my workplace in uniform without warning. Do you have any idea how this looks? People will think I used nepotism to get my daughter assigned to our project." I had to laugh, a short, sharp burst of irony. "Dad, I have spent my entire career avoiding any connection to your company precisely to prevent that perception. General Peterson assigned me to this project because of my expertise in adaptive cybersecurity systems and my record with similar implementations." "General Peterson?" my mother asked, her brows furrowed in confusion. "My mentor and commanding officer," I explained. "She has been what you could have been all these years, supportive, challenging when necessary, proud of my accomplishments." The words hit home, and I saw my mother flinch, a fleeting expression of regret crossing her face. "So this was all about showing us up," Arthur demanded, his voice rising. "Making us look foolish for not believing in your military career." "No," I said firmly, my gaze locking with his. "This was about doing my job, the job I have trained for, sacrificed for, and excelled at. The fact that you never took it seriously is not my responsibility." My father stood up, anger finally breaking through his initial shock. "You could have warned us. You deliberately let us go on believing you were still some junior officer pushing papers somewhere. Would it have mattered?" I asked quietly, my voice laced with a weary resignation. "When have any of you ever shown genuine interest in my career? Last night at dinner, not one of you asked me a single substantial question about my work or life. It was all about Arthur's promotion and Brenda's condo." The uncomfortable truth of this statement hung in the air between us, undeniable and heavy. "Niable. We always wanted what was best for you," my mother said weakly, her eyes pleading. "No," I corrected her, shaking my head slightly. "You wanted what you thought was best for me. You wanted me to follow the path you understood and valued. When I chose differently, you decided my choice was invalid, rather than considering that I might know what was right for my own life." My father sank back into his chair, the anger deflating, leaving behind a profound sense of weariness. "Your brother followed the plan. He's doing well. I am happy for Arthur," I said sincerely, a genuine softening in my voice. "But that was never going to be my path. I needed something different." Arthur uncrossed his arms, his defensive posture softening slightly as a flicker of something akin to shame in his eyes. "All these years we thought you were just stuck going nowhere." "I know what you thought," I replied. "You made it abundantly clear every time we spoke. You'll never be anything in the military. Those were your exact words last night, Arthur. He had the decency to look deeply ashamed, his gaze dropping to the floor. I didn't know, he mumbled. You never asked. I pointed out the words gentle but firm. None of you did. My mother stood up suddenly, her expression shifting, morphing into a forced smile. Well, now we know, and of course we are very proud. Very proud indeed. I always told your father that the military was a respectable career. The revisionist history was so typical, so utterly Martha, that I almost smiled. Mom, please don't do that, I said, my voice kind but firm. Don't pretend you've been supportive all along. It diminishes any chance of honest reconciliation. Her mouth opened and closed, unaccustomed to being directly contradicted, especially by me. Eleanor, my father said, using my name instead of my rank for the first time since the meeting, his voice tinged with a raw vulnerability. What do you want from us now? An apology? Public recognition? What I have always wanted, I replied, simply looking at each of them in turn. Respect for my choices. Acknowledgement that my path, while different from what you planned, has value and meaning. That is all I have ever asked for. The room fell silent again as they absorbed my words, the weight of years of unspoken truths pressing down on us. Finally, my father stood and approached me. For a moment, I thought he might try to hug me, but he stopped and extended his hand formally instead. Colonel Vance, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I owe you an apology, a significant one. I failed to recognize your achievements and dismissed your career out of ignorance and prejudice. I was wrong. The formality of his approach was so characteristic of him, yet the admission was entirely new, a profound crack in the wall he had built around his expectations. I accepted his handshake, my own hand trembling slightly. Thank you, Dad. I still don't understand everything about what you do. He continued, his gaze direct and earnest. But I would like to learn if you are willing to teach me. It was more than I had expected, and I felt something tight inside my chest begin to loosen, a fragile hope unfurling. I would like that, I replied, a genuine smile finally breaking through. My mother approached next, less comfortable with direct apologies, her hands clasped nervously. We should have come to your ceremonies, she said instead, her voice barely a whisper. I would have liked to see you recognized. It was as close to an apology as she could manage at the moment, and I accepted it with a nod, understanding her limitations. Arthur remained by the window, clearly struggling internally, his gaze fixed on some distant point. Finally, he spoke, his voice quiet. So you outrank me by a lot. This is not a competition, Arthur, I said gently, trying to diffuse the lingering tension. It always has been, though, he replied with surprising insight, looking at me with a newfound honesty. Mom and Dad set us up that way from the beginning. I just had the advantage of following the path they already approved of. It was the most honest thing my brother had said to me in years. We chose different paths. Both have value, I countered, hoping to build a bridge instead of a wall. He nodded slowly, a genuine acknowledgement in his eyes. For what it's worth, what I saw in that meeting today, I could never do what you do. The technical knowledge alone, not to mention the leadership presence. It was impressive. Not just impressive, truly impressive. Coming from Arthur, this was equivalent to a full prostration and apology. I felt the last of my defensive walls begin to lower, replaced by a quiet sense of triumph. Thank you, I said simply. My father cleared his throat, a hint of his old authoritative self returning, but softened now. Samantha wants to have dinner tonight with all of us now that she knows we're family. She's quite impressed with you, Eleanor. I know, I said, simply allowing myself a small knowing smile. Of course you know, my father replied, shaking his head with what looked like newfound respect, perhaps even a touch of awe. You probably know more about this company's operations than I do at this point. Only the classified parts, I said, and was rewarded with a genuine laugh from him, perhaps the first we had shared in years. The tension in the room had transformed into something different, something tentative but hopeful. There was damage to repair, years of dismissal, and hurt to work through. But for the first time, I felt that my family was seeing me, truly seeing me. I have another meeting to get to, I said, glancing at my watch. But I would be happy to join you all for dinner with Samantha tonight. As I turned to leave, my mother called out, her voice still a little hesitant. Eleanor, She struggled to find the words. I know, Mom, I said, gently looking back at her. One step at a time. I closed the door behind me, leaving my family to process the new reality. Their daughter, their sister, was not nothing, after all. She was Colonel Eleanor Vance, and she had earned every inch of the respect she now commanded. 6 months later, I hosted my family for dinner at my Washington, D.C. apartment. The spacious 2-bedroom condo overlooking the Potomac was a far cry from my childhood home in Montana. But it had become my sanctuary over the past few years. The changes in our family dynamic were still evolving, but progress was undeniable. My father Richard arrived first, carrying a framed news article about the successful implementation of Project Aegis and my pivotal role in it. He had had it professionally mounted and had been proudly displaying it in his office. "I thought you might want a copy for your wall as well," he said somewhat shyly, handing it to me. The article featured a photo of me in uniform alongside General Peterson and Samantha Reed at the project launch.
"Thank you, Dad," I replied, genuinely touched by the gesture. 6 months ago, he would have considered such military recognition irrelevant, perhaps even an embarrassment.
My mother Martha arrived with a homemade apple pie, my childhood favorite. Her attempts at connecting were still a little awkward, but undeniably sincere. She had stopped making comparisons between me and Arthur or Brenda. Instead, she asked genuine questions about my work, at least the unclassified parts. "Your apartment is lovely, Eleanor," she commented, looking around at the minimalist but elegant decor. "So neat and organized." "Military precision," I joked, and she actually laughed a real unforced laugh, instead of using it as an opportunity to subtly criticize my career choice. Arthur and Sarah arrived last, bringing an expensive bottle of wine. The most surprising transformation had been in my brother. After the initial shock wore off, he had approached me with genuine curiosity about my work and career path. "So," he began as we sat in the living room before dinner, "I implemented those security protocols you suggested last month. The team thought I was a genius for coming up with them." I raised an eyebrow, a playful challenge in my eyes. "Did you give credit where it was due?" He grinned sheepishly. "Eventually, after enjoying the praise for about 5 minutes. But seriously, the implementation has been smooth. The client is impressed." "Good work," I said sincerely. "Your team executes well." This simple professional acknowledgement meant more to him now than any familial platitude ever had. He had started seeing me as a colleague worthy of respect, not just his little sister to be dismissed. My father, who had been examining the military awards, displayed modestly on my bookshelf, turned to me. "I read that article about the cyber attack you helped prevent last year. I didn't understand all the technical details, but it sounded significant." "It was," I confirmed. "We caught it early, which was fortunate." "Lives were at stake?" he asked, beginning to grasp the profound importance of my work beyond the corporate bottom line.
"Potentially, yes," I responded. "Infrastructure security affects everyone."
He nodded thoughtfully. "I always thought military service was about physical combat. I never considered the cyber battlefield." "Most people don't," I acknowledged. "That's partly why we can be effective. Enemies don't always see us coming."
The doorbell rang, and I excused myself to answer it. General Peterson stood in the hallway, her uniform as impeccable as always, despite her off-duty status. "Colonel Vance," she greeted me with a warm smile.
"General," I returned the greeting, a genuine pleasure in my voice. "Thank you for joining us tonight." I had invited General Peterson to dinner, partly because she was in town for meetings, but also because I wanted my family to meet the woman who had believed in me when they had not. "Everyone," I announced as we returned to the living room. "This is Brigadier General Patricia Peterson, my commanding officer and mentor. General, this is my family." My father stood immediately extending his hand, with the respect he would show any high-ranking corporate executive. "General Peterson, it is an honor. I understand we have you to thank for recognizing Eleanor's potential." General Peterson shook his hand firmly, her gaze unwavering. "The potential was always there, Mr. Vance. I simply provided the opportunities for it to flourish." My mother bustled forward, a newfound eagerness in her demeanor. "General, please make yourself comfortable. Dinner is almost ready." As we moved to the dining table, the conversation flowed more naturally than any family gathering I could remember. General Peterson shared stories about military life that helped my parents understand the world I inhabited. While carefully avoiding classified details, she painted a vivid picture of the dedication, intelligence, and courage required of her officers. "Eleanor designed a simulation program that is now standard training for all cybersecurity personnel," she told them over the main course. Her approach reduced successful breach attempts in training scenarios by 63%. I watched my parents absorb this information, saw them truly hearing about my accomplishments, perhaps for the very first time. "We didn't know," my mother said quietly, a genuine remorse in her voice. "All these years we didn't know what you were really doing." "You never asked," I replied, but without the bitterness that would have colored those words 6 months ago. "But now you know, and that is what matters." After dinner, Arthur helped me clear the dishes while our parents continued talking with General Peterson. "You know," he said quietly, a surprising sincerity in his voice, "I spent years thinking I was ahead of you in the game of life, getting promotions, climbing the corporate ladder, making connections. But you were playing an entirely different game at a much higher level." "It was never a competition, Arthur," I reminded him gently. "I know that now," he acknowledged, "and I'm sorry for making it one." These moments of genuine connection, of raw honesty, would have seemed impossible during that painful family dinner 6 months ago. The healing was not complete. Perhaps it would never be fully complete, but it was real progress. Later, as we enjoyed coffee and my mother's apple pie, my father raised his glass in a toast. To Colonel Eleanor Vance, he said, his voice carrying an unmistakable note of pride, who proved that following your own path can lead to extraordinary places. We may have been slow to see it, but we couldn't be prouder now. I raised my glass along with the others, feeling a sense of peace I had not experienced in my childhood home for many years. The validation I had once desperately sought from my family no longer defined me, but their recognition was still healing, a soothing balm on old wounds. In the end, it was never about proving them wrong. It was about becoming who I was meant to be, whether they approved or not. That they had finally come to respect my choices was not the victory. The victory had been in making those choices for myself all along. Valuable lesson. This story teaches us that true validation comes from within. While family support is important, it's crucial to define your own success and pursue your passions, even when those closest to you don't understand or approve. Your worth isn't determined by others' expectations, but by your own achievements and self-belief. Sometimes the most powerful way to earn respect is to simply live your truth and let your accomplishments speak for themselves. So, what about you? Have you ever had your achievements dismissed by people who should have supported you? How did you handle it? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience and triumph. Remember, your path is valid even when others fail to see its value.